Today I gave Pickett's Bayou another shot, following two previous paddles that were less than pleasant, for reasons we'll get into later. Today's journey will begin at the Trinity River Recreation Area, located at 1749 County Road 417 in Liberty, Texas. This destination offers restrooms, a few primitive trails, a fishing pier, and separate launches onto both Champion Lake and Pickett's Bayou. The Pickett's launch is a standard boat ramp that will accommodate paddlecraft and trailered craft alike. On that note, expect the possibility of sharing the water with powered craft. The posted regulations dictate only outboard motors at or below 40 horsepower, but I've seen boats launch here on several occasions in defiance of this ordinance. Still, this seems to be primarily fishermen, who generally display reasonable temperament around kayakers. Another note about the Pickett's launch involves the parking situation. While the neighboring Champion Lake launch has a few adjacent parking spots available, the Pickett's launch only has one handicap spot in the immediate vicinity. All other traffic will have to park a good ways up a hill and hike back down. It's by no means a deal breaker, but it might be profitable information for those with limited mobility. With that, here's a quick overview of the route to start. We'll launch and take a brief detour straight ahead along the section that parallels the levee foot trail. When water levels are high, you might be able to make it to the levee, but I've never been able to make it beyond a subtle spillway shortly in. There are some of the biggest gators I've seen in this immediate area, but not today, given the high heat index. With that, we'll swing a U-turn and bear east onto Pickett's Bayou proper. Other than the heat, the conditions were nice and lent themselves to the pristine scenery. Skies started off blue with wispy white clouds. Winds were at a reasonable 8 miles per hour out of the south-southeast. Other than a few cutouts along the way, the vast majority of this trek will have a similar aesthetic of towering, tree-lined banks flanking both sides of the bayou. As such, there is little in the way of notable landmarks on this one, just a nearly continuous tract of nature's backdrop. This sounds entirely ideal, with the exception of one caveat: the multitude of gnats that have swarmed me on every trip here. I was hoping that today's trek would offset my two prior paddles. Today was not quite as bad as the aforementioned outings, but it was still a constant and irritating enough distraction to break any semblance of immersion to be found on this trek. As such, I was sporting a stylish and sweltering mosquito net for much of this journey. I'm unsure why I've had this persistent issue here and nowhere else, not even on the immediately adjacent Champion Lake. Often low wind is desired, but here I find myself begging for heavy gusts to drive the pests away. With that caveat out of the way, let's get back to the route and its minimal landmarks. Just under 2 miles in, you'll see some derelict, vegetation-covered structures in a clearing marked with several "no trespassing" signs to starboard. Around mile 2.5, you'll see the generously titled Jack's Island, which consists of a cypress stump and a few rusty metal fittings. Just slightly beyond, you'll see a sign to starboard labeled Linda's Narrows. As the sign alludes, the bayou tightens considerably here. In the past, I've made it a good distance in, but today it was clogged with debris not too far from the entrance. There were still plenty of obstacles to navigate and confined spaces to negotiate, along with a surprisingly strong current that was further accentuated by the confluences resulting from piling branches and other debris. It's here that we'll turn back today and head for home. But the trek was far from over. Just a short while after embarking on the return paddle, the skies quickly darkened, and I was met with the most substantial deluge that I've yet experienced on the water. The forecast called for a very low percentage chance of showers, but the showers didn't get the memo. I wish I could have recorded the waterway at the heaviest rainfall, but it likely would have meant sacrificing my gear to do so. Thankfully, the thunder didn't catch up until I was only a short distance from the launch. and I came off the water just in time. Soaked, but safe. With that, I trekked back up the hill to retrieve my truck, dumped an abundance of water from my kayak, and loaded up. My closing observations regarding the Pickett's Bayou launch are as follows. If you can somehow avoid the marauding gnats, it would be a serene spot for sure. The Gulf Coast Bayou ambience is great, and while wildlife was sparse today due to conditions, more often than not, you're likely to spot a plethora of waterfowl, several gators, and occasionally some deer. Speaking of gators, you may not see them as much here as in Almond or Turtle Bayou, but I'm convinced that they have a similar population here nonetheless. You often just have to look a little harder here. I have seen a few dominant behemoths that rival any of those I've covered on other waterways, with a handful reaching beyond 13 feet. In my experience, you're often just as likely to see them from the adjacent hiking trail as from the kayak. It's a route that can be enjoyed without substantial risk. However, keep in mind that powerboats may be encountered here and there are a few hefty confluences in the narrower eastern sections. Also, today's quickly encroaching storm is a poignant reminder that unforeseen dangers can arise even when diligence has been exercised in reviewing the forecast well beforehand. One final subjective observation I'll offer is that the largely linear nature of Pickett's Bayou can make it feel a bit monotonous, if not engaged in another activity such as fishing. Personally, I enjoy my bayou paddles with a few more twists and turns, as well as more variance in topography. But that's coming from a paddler who's been spoiled by the plethora of other fantastic local routes. Some might find this preferable. To conclude, it's not one I'll soon revisit. However, many kayakers I know, trust, and respect have sung the praises of this route. So I definitely suggest that you give it a shot and draw your own conclusion. Paddle safe, and God bless.